Chapter 6. The endless expansion of humanity is the most fruitful event in the galaxy. It was also the most terrifying. From the Archive of Artificial Intelligence by Dr. Hasta Lowe. The shuttle bay was organized chaos the next morning. Crew teams were attending to the last-minute pre-flight checks, and the security forces began loading ammunition and arms into the shuttles. The shuttle pilots had been in their shuttles for several hours performing their checks to ensure safe flight. This was the most work, in the shortest time frame, that these crew members had ever achieved. It appeared frantic to the untrained eye, but these voidsmen were professionals and proficient in the tasks, as well as highly trained and diligent in their trades. Altus watched over the chaos from the overhead gantry and would have smiled if he hadn't been so worried about what all this activity meant. He had made the decision to be included with the landing crew against his instinct for self-preservation. Sergeant Salg had argued against it, but had stopped trying to talk him out of it when Altus reminded him that the only reason he was even allowing this expedition to occur was because Salg had talked him into it. That had shut him up. He meant well and Altus knew it, but he was not going to let him live it down. From his vantage point, the commander had seen the large construct as it had been moved from the cargo hold to a transport shuttle. Why the doctor had insisted on bringing it, he would never understand. It was massive and took up an entire transport shuttle by itself. He had also noticed how the doctor seemed to care for the construct as if it were a child. It struck him as odd, but he dismissed the notion. There were many odd things about the doctor. That was just another for the ever-growing list. As he watched a box-shaped troop transport being loaded with personal transportation craft, he saw Sergeant Salg dictating orders to two crew chiefs. Based purely on the length of time he had known the man, he could tell by his body language that he wasn't happy about something. With a sigh, he headed down from the gantry and made his way to the shuttle bay. His sword bounced firmly on his hip as he made his way down the stairs, and it provided him with some sense of comfort. He could feel the weight of his graviton pistol in its holster on his right side. He had always felt better when he was armed. Something about having a weapon on his side gave him a small feeling of security and safety. He knew that in the void of space all weapons were useless against the nature of the void. But against anything else, that was a different story. He found his mind wandering as he walked, thinking back to his days as the commander of the Havoc. The Titan-class warship was purpose-built for one thing only: battle. It was commissioned in case humanity was discovered by, or found by accident, hostile alien life. The warship had been one of the most impressive displays of humanity's ability to destroy in the past few centuries. But Terran Pride was no warship. She was still more than capable of defending herself. But she didn't sport the heavy weaponry that even smaller warships would boast. However, as a colonization and exploration ship, it did bring to bear one of the largest hangars, full of gunships and transports. In humanity's armada of vessels. Those vessels were intended to break the atmosphere of a planet numerous times, and he had no doubt that they would be able to withstand most things that could be thrown at them. Approaching the main shuttle bay, he found Sergeant Salg coordinating the crews to their individual voidcraft. The gunship crews were already prepared and ready, and now the tasks fell to the transport and support groups to fall in line. That was what the sergeant excelled at, getting his men to do what he needed them to do without becoming an obnoxiously overbearing drill instructor from the academy. He had a way of talking to his men that made them feel proud to be under his command. Altus made up his mind that if they all came out of this in one piece, he would promote the man. He deserved it. "Sergeant!" Altus called out as he approached. "How are the preparations?" The sergeant turned and gave a curt salute in greeting. "The crews are progressing on schedule, sir. We should be ready to head planet-side within the hour." "Good. Good," Altus said, returning the salute and keeping his voice as steady and professional as possible. "How is the doctor faring?" Sergeant Salg looked over his shoulder in the direction of Dr. Bondi's shuttle. "He's excited to be on the surface. Too excited if you ask me. He's going to make a mistake and get hurt." Altus nodded. "I had a feeling that might be the case. We have to try and keep him safe, for his own good." "As you wish, Commander." The sergeant said dryly, "If you will excuse me, sir, I need to see to the shuttles." "Of course." Altus knew that Saug didn't agree with having to babysit the doctor. He also knew that the sergeant wouldn't say anything against an order. That was a good thing in most situations, but not always. Altus firmly believed that a commander needed to have someone that would talk back to them when the situation called for it. It kept a man humble and kept him from thinking that he was always right. As he walked around the shuttle bay, he talked to crew chiefs and voidsman. They all expressed an eager excitement to be doing what they were trained to do, even if it was in less than ideal circumstances. When he arrived at his rectangular-shaped transport shuttle, he spoke with the pilot and tech man who were busy doing their last-minute flight checks and prepping the shuttle for launch. Altus did not know them by name, but that was not uncommon. There were, of course, over 20,000 crewmen on Terran Pride. He secured his gear pack where instructed by the crew chief and took his place in the densely padded transport cabin. The rear of a transport shuttle was not built for comfort. It was purpose-built with one thing in mind: get the crew from orbit to the surface in one piece. The olive green and tan seating pods were lined with a dense expanding foam that would keep the person sitting in it safe during the dangerous event of entering a planet's atmosphere. On both sides of the head were padded locking arms that kept the passenger's head from being slung around due to turbulence. Likewise, the 8-point restraint harness kept their body from moving around the cabin when it wasn't supposed to. All experienced voidsmen that had ever had the displeasure of riding in one of these 300-ton behemoths knew that if something were to happen to the shuttle upon entry, these pads and restraints would not do anything but keep your corpse in one piece. That was exactly how these ships had gotten their unfortunate nickname, the Flying Coffin. At least that was the polite version. They were rectangular-shaped and ugly. Barely something that would be considered aerodynamic, but their large wing-mounted rotating thrusters made up for any lack of sleekness. The designation for the transport was the AFFC, or Aeronautical Forward Fighting Craft. It was a stripped-down version of its cousin, which was a gunship designated the High Altitude Recon Craft Gunship, or HARCG, for short. That had been given the affectionate nickname of Falcons by its crew members and those that had been saved by them. This was mostly due in part to the sharp-angled wings and the front profile of the ship, but also because of the impressive arsenal it housed on each of its wings. Both of these 80-meter-long, 300-ton void craft would be escorting or transporting his men. In total, 10 flying coffins and 4 Falcons would be going to the surface along with their crew and passengers, totaling 350 men. The captain of the flying coffin turned to Commander Altus and spoke into his headset. "We are ready for takeoff, Commander." Altus gave the man a thumbs up and spoke into his comlink on his sleeve. "Sergeant Saug, whenever you are ready, give the word." His comlink buzzed with an electric static for a brief second before the grizzled voice of Deck Sergeant Saug came through to his earpiece. "Understood, sir. I am making my way to your shuttle now." A few moments later, Sergeant Saug strode up through the rear hatch and into the seating area, followed by 8 members of his elite security forces. They were all armed and armored in their Plastec chest armor and helmets. Each of them carried a combination graviton and plasma rifle, which made them highly effective in any environment. The security force team quickly and efficiently stowed their gear and sat attaching their restraint harnesses with deft hands. Saug approached each of them and double-checked each of their harnesses and gear of correctness and safety. Altus watched all of this and knew that he was watching men work who had been training for this very thing for a long time. Sergeant Saug approached Altus last and checked the rigging of his harness to ensure it was locked correctly. "Believe it or not, Sergeant," Altus said with a wry grin, "I do know how to correctly rig a transport harness." "Well, sir," Saug replied with a lopsided smile, "I just figured I might want to double-check, since it's been so long since you've done it for real." Altus laughed to himself as the sergeant took his place in the seat across from him and attached his own harness. Altus keyed his communicator and cycled through the channels until he found the shuttle bay control bridge. "Control bridge. This is Commander Altus. We are ready to launch. All systems are green on our end, Commander. Have a safe journey. Humanitas Super Omnia," came the response from the control bridge personnel. Altus nodded to the pilot and sat back in his harness seat. With that, the pilot punched in the key to initiate the launch, and with a lurch, the shuttle exited into the void, followed closely by 7 other ships. As they made their approach to the planet, Altus had a growing sense of dread that he just could not place his finger on. It was elusive and would not be tamed no matter how hard he tried to suppress it. He thought to himself that whatever it was, he could not affect it at this moment, so it would be in his best interest to ignore it until he was free of this flying coffin. The shuttles broke through the atmosphere at breakneck speed, their thrusters screaming in protest. The front deflector screens showed only a white and orange haze as the shuttle penetrated the upper atmosphere and descended into the lower. The whole cab shook as the turbulence of the descent threatened to tear the shuttle apart. Suddenly, the shuddering of the shuttle became bearable, and everyone on board could feel the ship beginning to level out into a flight path. "We are through the atmosphere and making a descent toward the planet's surface." The pilot's voice rang out throughout the cabin speakers between gritty static. "We should be attempting a landing in 12 minutes. Altus shook off the dizziness of the transport and mentally prepared himself for what might be down on the surface. When the shuttle made landfall, Altus unfastened his harness quickly, ready to be out of the flying turbulence machine. The light to the left of the boarding ramp switched from red to green, and the ramp descended, and a harsh bright light flooded the cabin. Altus waited patiently for the ramp to fully descend before stepping out onto it and shielding his eyes from the light. The fortnight aboard Terran Pride had done nothing to prepare his eyes for the brightness of a cloudless day. After the shock to his eyes, the first thing Altus noticed was the smell. The environment had a fresh and wet smell, like the first spring rain on an agricultural farm. It smelled of ozone and didn't have the harsh stink of pollution from factories or the acidic tang that comes from the chemical contrails of ships. He looked out over a lush green terrain that was so vibrant that it didn't appear real. It was very close to a sensory overload. Altus managed to pull his hand away from his brow after his eyes had adjusted to the light, and he looked around at the other ships on the grassy makeshift landing zone. As he watched the others have similar reactions to his, he realized just how significant this moment was. He took a brief moment to revel in that fact. Dr. Bondi stepped out of his shuttle on shaky legs. That trip had not at all been what he expected. It was extremely turbulent and downright terrifying. Not an excursion he wished to experience again if he could help it. His first sensation was a blinding hot light that forced him to cover his eyes. The second was his breakfast exiting his body the same way it had entered as he fell to his knees in the grass. He heard laughter from behind him and felt a set of hands help him to his feet. "Don't worry, Doc," a friendly voice said from behind him. "It happens to everyone the first time." Hal looked up into the face of a young man that couldn't have been older than his early 20s. He was wearing a wide smile which made his face look kind and innocent, his hazel eyes shining in the sunlight. His head was covered in an oddly fitting plastic helmet that didn't seem to fit him correctly. Hal noted that this must be one of the security forces that was on his shuttle. He wiped the vomit from the corner of his mouth with a handkerchief and slid it back into his pocket. "Thank you, son," he said, steadying himself. "I was not expecting that at all." The young man's laugh was not a slight to Hal but seemed to be genuine amusement. "Neither was I the first time I made a landing from orbit," he said with a chuckle. "But hey, it happens to everyone, right? No sense in being embarrassed about it." Hal nodded his agreement. "You certainly have a point there, my boy. My name's FYND," he said, holding out his hand. "Thaddeus FYND. Dr. Hal Bondi," Hal said, shaking the boy's hand. The young man nodded knowingly. "Oh, I know you, sir. We just never had the pleasure of meeting. I've heard all about you." "Ah, I see news travels fast on the ship," Hal mused. "Yes, sir, it does," Thaddeus said with a sheepish look. "But that's not where I've heard of you from." "Oh." Hal didn't think this boy looked like the type to pick up a book on quantum engineering of theoretical hexamathematics for fun. "Then where have you heard about me?" The boy's reply shook him a little. "From my brother, Hasta Low." The boy responded. "You are Hasta's brother?" Hal asked incredulously. Hasta had never mentioned having a brother. However, the man had hardly mentioned anything that was outside his work at all. "Yes, sir," Thaddeus said excitedly. "He spoke of you all the time when he would message me at home." "Well, my boy, that certainly is a welcome coincidence having you here," Hal stated, his genuine sincerity coating every word. "Oh, it's no coincidence, Dr. Bondi. But I'll have to tell you about that later. I need to catch up to my squad," he said, gesturing over his shoulder with his thumb. "I'll talk to you later, yeah?" "Oh, course." Hal nodded. "We shall speak again soon." The young man bounded off after his squad, who were pulling pallets of equipment out of the shuttles. Hal watched him for a moment as he worked, his thoughts racing. Pulling himself from his own mind, he turned back to the landscape and marveled at it. The colors intertwining with the smells, the sights and sounds. Then it struck him. What sounds? All he heard were the pulsed thrumming of thrusters powering down and the crew talking amongst themselves while moving crates out of the shuttles. There were no sounds of birds or animals or water rushing, nothing. Hal turned away from the lush green landscape and walked around the side of the shuttle. What he saw was a grey hellscape. Off in the distance, the green of the vibrant grassland ascended into a craggy and rock-strewn vast nothingness. In the far distance appeared to be a mountain range, but between the mountains and the shuttles was nothing but sharp shards of black and grey rock and open land. Hal felt as if the wind had been knocked out of him. They were so close to the target of the radiation spike, but now it seemed impossible to reach it. He could feel the defeat rising in his gut, and he pushed it down with such force that a cool anger took its place. He turned and marched back to the pilot of his shuttle, intent on getting answers as to why they did not land closer to the anomaly. Before he could reach the pilot, however, he was intercepted by Commander Altus. "Doctor, are you seeing this?" he asked with an air of wonder about him. "This is incredible." Yes, Commander. It's simply amazing. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a pilot to interrogate." That statement snapped the commander out of his amazement. "What do you mean, why?" "Look at where we are, Commander. Look at where we need to go. We landed much too far south to get to the source of the radiation," Hal said in exasperation. "I am aware of this," Altus stated sternly. "I authorized the landing zone. Why did you authorize it so far short of where we need to be?" Hal exclaimed in shock. He could feel his face getting hot with anger and frustration. "Because of something you did not foresee, Doctor. The radiation is at its peak at the point by that mountain range," Altus said, pointing towards the north. "However, that radiation has seeped all the way to here. I landed us just inside the safe threshold to do so." Hal balked at the commander. "So you mean to tell me that the radiation carried itself all the way to here? Possibly 100 kilometers, on nothing but wind? It's not possible." "It is possible. The radiation was affecting our pilot sensors and affecting all of their instrumentation. It was not safe to continue towards the mountain." Altus placed both hands on his hips and stared at the doctor. "Come with me. I want you to see something." Altus turned and walked away toward the divide where the grass became rocky. It took them a few moments of walking, but after some time they reached the divide. Hal was startled to see that it was not a smooth transition where the grasslands slowly became increasingly less hospitable. Instead, it was a drastic change, as if someone had drawn a line and the grasslands just stopped. This was not how terrain worked, Hal thought to himself. This shouldn't be possible. This looked like it was created this way on purpose. He bent to pick up a rock when a hand grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back away from the grey dust-covered rocks and threw him to the ground, flat on his back. "What are you dash?" Hal started to say when he looked up at the commander, but something about the look on Altus' face gave him pause. "Don't cross the divide between the two terrains," he said flatly. "It would not be wise." Hal nodded and picked himself up off the ground. Dusting himself off, he asked, "What is this, Commander? What did you want to show me?" Altus pulled out a nutrition packet from a pocket inside his coat. Unwrapping it, he broke it in half and tossed it to Harl, who caught it in both hands. "Throw it into the rocks," Altus instructed. Harl looked at the piece of nutrition bar and then tossed it 1 or 2 meters onto the rocks. As it crossed the barrier, something strange happened. The food bar began to dissolve into a grey smoke like fine dust before it hit the ground and dissipated. Harl's face went pale and his hands began to tremble slightly. "That is the other reason I did not want to fly closer to the origin point," Altus said before walking away and speaking over his shoulder. "We will just need to find another way to do your study safely." Harl stood there with his mouth agape. This was unlike anything he had ever seen. His many years between scientific disciplines had not prepared him for anything like this. For the first time in a long time he was unsure how to proceed. The more he looked around on this planet, the more unsure he became about everything. It was as if whatever was up in those mountains did not want to be discovered, and what was more concerning about it was that it appeared to be doing a good job of it. Altus marched back towards his command vehicle and climbed in the back. He looked around at the crew, who were still in the process of setting up the interior of the command cabin. The command vehicle was not large by UCIP naval standards, but still boasted a spacious 230 square meters of space for all of the control consoles and holotables needed for mapping and battlefield coordination. It was sparse at the moment while it was still being set up, but soon enough it would be filled with crew and staff performing duties necessary to the function of the expedition. The Mark 7 Modular Utility Command Vehicle, also known as a MUC, could hold over a dozen crew members and could be modified into over a dozen different patterns with relative ease. However, of all of the variants, the command template was the most common among expeditions. Sergeant Saug walked up the ramp into the control room of the command vehicle. Looking around at the work being done, he motioned for Altus to follow him. Altus muttered a handful of curses under his breath as he walked out to see the sergeant. Saug never came to him with an issue that he could solve himself. The man was incredibly self-reliant and was more than capable. That's why it always meant trouble when he came to Altus with a problem. "Yes, Sergeant," Altus said, trying to keep his frustrations down. "You needed to speak with me." "Yes, sir. It's about that construct thing we brought down. Why are you bringing this to me and not the doctor?" Altus thought for a moment. "Unless something went wrong with it and you don't want the doctor to know," he said under his breath. Saug nodded in confirmation. "Yes, sir, that is correct." "Well," Altus said with a sigh. "What is it?" "I don't have the foggiest idea, sir," Saug replied. "You just need to see it for yourself." Altus' mind began racing as they walked over to the shelter that had been erected over the construct known as Enoch. It had the same pale green glow emanating from the circular oculus on what Altus had deemed to be the front of the construct. Altus glanced over at Sergeant Saug and saw that he had uncrossed his arms and had a hand resting on his holstered sidearm. When he looked back at the construct, he did not immediately notice a change. But then, ever so slowly, he noticed it. The color was changing, shifting from a pale green to a muted orange. "What is happening?" Altus asked. He wasn't worried about a change in the color scheme of the construct, so it had to be something else. "Just watch," Saug retorted, holding up a hand, gesturing for quiet. Altus watched for a few more moments until he really noticed what was happening. Ever so slowly the construct was changing, in very small ways, but it was, in fact, changing. The structure itself was being added to. It appeared as if it were growing, like some type of large metal plant. "Go find Dr. Bondi," Altus said in a stern tone to his sergeant. "I need to understand this." Thank you for watching. More content will be coming out every week, so hit the like and subscribe button so these stories can be seen by more people. I hope you have a great day.